For more on refugees fueling entrepreneurship, I spoke with Shelley Taylor, founder and CEO of the Refugee Aid app. I began by asking her what drives refugees to start their own businesses.
I think that in order to be a refugee, it means that you've had to escape something that was pretty bad, or you wouldn't go through the whole process of either crossing borders illegally or waiting for 2 years in a refugee camp in order to get into the U.S., for example. So they're tremendously courageous and resilient. Most of us wouldn't leave home with nothing but a mobile phone and like the clothes on our back. And the fact that they're able to do this, and sometimes it takes them years before they get to their destination, those are exactly the skills and kind of inner strength that an entrepreneur needs.
Certainly hard enough to start a business, even on a level playing field, let alone when you're coming from such an experience. So in terms of what establishing these businesses, what does that actually mean for the entrepreneurs, as well as the broader communities that they're entering?
Well, what it means to the entrepreneurs is independence and self-sufficiency. And I think that's the thing that makes an entrepreneur an entrepreneur. It's people who are interested in creating their own destiny. So by selling these small goods and services to start and entering other businesses, they are really a lot more independent and self-sufficient than a lot of people who have jobs, because they're relying entirely on themselves. In terms of the communities they start with usually are their own communities of other refugees and people that they meet in their little local hangouts. And so they have a lot in common with these people who are basically nomadic people. So they are able, I think, to understand the needs of the community that they're starting out with in terms of what they sell.
Now, when a lot of people think of the organizations that help refugees, they're predominantly thinking about aid, but we're also seeing a lot more of them now introducing this entrepreneurial aspect and really trying to help people establish a small business. What do you think about adding that extra layer when it comes to helping them start a business?
I think it's a lot more efficient than the aid that's given out. Obviously, when people first arrive in the U.S. or into the country that they've traveled to, they need some kind of aid to get started, but it's usually only temporary. In most countries, it's not more than 6 months. And so teaching people how to create businesses, they may have already known it back home, because in most cultures, people do have a lot more entrepreneurial kind of endeavors, but teaching them the skills, the banking systems, and all the things they need to know is really making them way more self-sufficient. And as you know, in Silicon Valley, it's filled with entrepreneurs and people who've come from other countries and have created some of the biggest countries in the U.S. So it's a great place to start.
And let's also look at Silicon Valley. As you mentioned, we see a lot of first-generation and second-generation immigrants starting some of the world's biggest companies. But then you also have this perception about immigrants coming into communities, and there's also this fear. How do we bridge that gap?
I think that's lack of education, in the general public. I think if they realized what percentage of businesses have been started by first or second generation immigrants, it's probably a greater percentage have been started by first or second generation immigrants than have been started by people who've been here since the Mayflower. And they have so much hustle, and so many of the things that we all aspire to buying, a Tesla, for example, or some of the other things have been created by these first-generation immigrants, people who came over in their 20s, for example.
Now, in terms of countries that have been more welcoming and better at integrating immigrant and refugee populations, who are some of the standouts?
I actually think that the U.S. is probably one of the better places for immigrants to come to. It's not very welcoming right now, and there certainly have been periods of time when our doors were not as open as Americans, but in terms of people being welcome and everyone having a great and equal opportunity to build and create something, the U.S. is great. There's other countries, like Italy is an amazing country in terms of accepting, they have boatloads of people coming in from some of the most war-torn places, and they are such a generous country in terms of making sure that everybody has the basic needs covered. But I don't think it's quite as welcoming in terms of people wanting to stay there and build their lives there and become entrepreneurs and, be part of the society. So there's differences between the two.
Now, other than overcoming the challenges of actually getting to these destination countries, adding on top of that the challenge of trying to start a business, some people who may not know the lay of the land may perhaps be taken advantage of if they're not exactly sure how the industries work. What are some of the challenges there?
I think that it depends on the country that you're going into. If you're coming into the U.S., I think that the banking system is relatively straightforward, and if they get exposed to that, then they're at least running into a situation where their money is safe. I think that there are certainly charlatans in every country, and it's probably in the less legitimate kind of aspects of business, but it certainly wouldn't be in terms of banking and in the U.S. especially. In other countries, the whole money exchanging happens between one community person and another community person. I think you have a little bit more to look out for there.